2023 is coming to a close, and I would like to look back on the past year and cover the top 10 board game issues that came up this year. There was a lot, multi-million-dollar losses, scams, the whole shebang. There was industry like almost revolt at one point. We're going to go through it all, kind of summarize what's going on, how we can learn from it, how we can make 2024 better. So I'm going to try and make this as positive of a negative video as I can. Hey guys, before we get any farther into this video, I want to thank my sponsor for today's video, Into the AM. This is just happens to be what I'm wearing right now. All Into the AM stuff all the time, guys. It's so comfy. It feels great. It fits great. And it's at a great price right now. You might have some gift cards or some other shopping to do maybe after Christmas. They have an 80% off site-wide end-of-year sale, but I want to focus not so much on that or the fact that you can save 10% on top of that with the code in the description below. Feel free to use that, of course, but their new arrivals are on point, and there's a new shirt from Squidmar I want to show you guys. So let's take a look. So as you can see, they're banging out on all the stuff here. They have everything from like the geisha stuff's coming back. They have some Norse stuff. They got their own cosmic court. They're doing the space stuff. The owl's coming back. We got a lot of great stuff here. I love reading, and so the Nebula novels looks great. Skeletal Beats, love to headbang, love that. That's awesome, of course. And good old Squidmar right there, rocking his giant Squid Knight tee. And there's so much more. Feel free to check it out. Again, they're having a huge site-wide sale, and you can save 10% additional on top of that with the code below. Thank you, Into the AM, for making such awesome products that I enjoy almost every single day as I wear these. Thank you guys for supporting them and in turn supporting this channel. And with that, let's get back into it. All right, so starting things out with what I think represents a tendency with a lot of these companies when it comes to, and I just covered this in my recent top 10 when I was revisiting my old top 10 on like what I expected 2023 to be, and there was a lot of like misfires where they didn't ever like make a game kind of thing. And the whole like making a game thing is really hard. And so this kind of represents this. This is talking about this part in the left here, how Senkokushin, the Five Sacrifices, essentially stopped being a board game, at least for the foreseeable future. They were pumping up these huge updates. Axis Mundi Games, the company that was kind of working on it, talking about all the different game details and all the different game mechanics and stuff like that. And then essentially said that it's way too much work, it's adding too much stress, they're not going to launch now, and in fact, they won't even say when or if they ever will kind of thing. And then they just started selling miniatures. Now, one of the things that it points out is, first of all, that building up hype and launching a campaign is really hard, right? Like it's hard to know how long of a lead time you need and how much you should put out before versus after, anything like that, right? Like you can only hold hype for so long. And so there's that, but also it goes to show how easy it is to write about this stuff and how hard it is to actually make it, right? So they had these huge updates with all this artwork and all, talking about all these different mechanics, but talking about mechanic is easy. Balancing it out and making it work well and smoothly within an entire huge game, very, very hard. And we see this all the time with Kickstarter updates, GameFound updates, all these crowd-funded updates where you get all this information, look at all this cool stuff, or even the campaign page itself. But the actual work involved in actually implementing that isn't as easily said as just saying it. And you can say it long before it's fully implemented. And that kind of shows that, I think, very well. They had so much information on this game that they could have put that on the campaign page, and it would have had more game info than most of the campaigns that actually turn out to be a game. And yet it's not a game at all yet, and not even close. There's a ton of work still to do. So it really kind of goes to show that issue. And I think that's something that's important to note going forward. So this kind of rounds up the bottom. Now, right, we're going to get super serious here super quick. But for now, number 10, definitely just the inability to typically see the issue of how big of a game something actually is. And our lack of line of sight into that, where we can't possibly see it because none of these companies do proper, legitimate tracking, task, breakdown, all that kind of stuff, right? None of these guys are like doing any kind of agile methodology that I can see of any kind, where it comes to actually reporting on progress on a big task. Companies, real companies, and I don't mean to say board game companies aren't real companies, but I mean like legit companies, as in like companies that really like make things more than board games, right? A lot of the software companies, for instance, are like this. They have a very good way of tracking work, displaying work, reporting progress, estimates, all that kind of stuff. There's tons of tools out there to do it. Not a single one of the devs I have ever seen implement it. And so they are doing this hardcore development, a lot like software development, but without any of the modern tools or best practices on actually making it happen. And it's kind of a travesty, and I would love to see a company actually do that. If I saw a burn up chart or even a burn down chart or anything like that on a board game crowdfunding update, I would lose my mind. You guys, I would show that on a video. You guys would see it. We don't even get Gantt charts. Okay. So we got like nothing. We got nothing. Okay. So let's talk about the next one. Number 9 is, this one is the board game industry broken. This was kind of a summary video I did. And by the way, we're looking at just the thumbnails. I'm going to talk about like what the issue is. So these are all things I covered throughout this year, by the way. If you appreciate that, and if I provided any kind of value to you from that, I do have a fundraiser down in the link below, as well as, the sponsors that I mentioned, and of course, my Patreon. So if you would like to join any of that and help support another year of great board game coverage that I hope I can provide to you, that's all linked down below. Thank you so much. In this one, I talked about the board game industry and being broken. This was kind of in I think May of this year. And what I was talking about specifically was the myriad of issues when it comes to line of sight on actual progress, not getting told the truth, being kept in the dark, being, censored for asking questions, fake, funding goals, and then canceling after being funded because they weren't actually funded right. All that kind of stuff kind of combined into this. And while it's not a specific thing that I'm pointing out here, it kind of goes to a tendency or a trend line that I've noticed covering this board game industry for the years that I have on the increase in these issues. More campaigns are keeping you in the dark, and then you find out later that actually since 4 months ago they've been out of money, or that they didn't have money when they launched the campaign and they were hoping that the campaign would actually pay for it. We'll be talking about one of those and a higher up one. Or, going back on your word, even though you say one thing and do another, like charging more and stuff like that. Or just funding and then canceling anyway because it was all a lie, or purposely manipulating different things, or lying about the shipping prices and then flipping it on high. This trend line is going up, sadly. Now, I think it's kind of starting to taper off, and I'm hoping 2024, if nothing else, stays the same amount. And I don't want to start 2024 like I did with 2023, writing disaster as my first thumbnail. Hopefully it's a better year. But that 2023 definitely represented an uptick, an increase, and a lot of these kind of scammy, Ponzi schemey kind of stuff going on. And it's really kind of unfortunate that's the case. It's hurting the industry a lot, and it's definitely a big issue. So that was my video to kind of encapsulate that a little bit. And again, that was early to mid 2023 already, and I was already noticing that, and it just kind of kept going. So hopefully 2024 is better. We will see, of course. All right, next up we have this one, and really the focus here is going to be on the Gen Con Chaos thing. So if you didn't know, Lorcana, the Disney trading card game, launched to a lot of craze. And one of the issues that came up with this is, I guess, a lack of professionalism around a lot of the industry support for such things. So you have this issue in Gen Con, and it's a combination of things. It's a combination of companies, especially the card gaming companies, purposely making their things collectible to drive more money and more profits. In other words, this has nothing to do with the quality of the gameplay. This is not a mechanic thing. This is just a really good product. This is something rare and exclusive, timed, limited, and you can only get it here. And there was such an increase in that this year that I thought, if nothing else, this is worth pointing out. Where even board games, or your normal board games now, if it has cards half the time, it seems. No, it's not quite half the time, but it seems. And there were many cases where this was the case. You're getting your cards, the non-random cards, in your board game in booster packs just because then it looks like a trading card pack that you're opening up. That is a legitimate thing that companies are starting to try and do more and more, or include a certain little pack of random elements or whatever in these booster packs. The booster pack craze, thanks to the rise in Pokemon, the continued rise in Magic the Gathering, and a few successes on crowdfunding both last year and this year, have really driven this to a level where it's like a bandwagoning thing, right? So there's companies that are purposely, trying to put NFTs into their cards. That's literally been a thing before, or doing these special things like limited release Gen Con stuff, right? That Lorcana did. Or even, again, just your normal board games that normally would just have cards in there now come in booster packs for no other reason than it looks kind of like that, and they can advertise it that way, and people like that right now. That's in vogue, right? That's the popular thing. So it's a combination of doing that at events and stuff like that, but then the events like Gen Con not being able to handle a craze like that, plus the industry just being crazed enough to do this. So what happened at Gen Con here? So Lorcana, obviously, they're having these sales, limited, all this kind of stuff, and so people start lining up way early on. And the line for the Lorcana is huge, and it's a mess, and because Gen Con doesn't have it organized when it comes to line, because there is no line, but then of course there is a line. And so people are trying to line up in multiple different locations and stuff. And then the worst possible thing happened. It was like a perfect storm. So there's all this craze that's been building up for hours and hours and hours as people want to rush the Lorcana thing. And I went to Essen Spiel this year, and they did the same thing there, where there were people speed walking. I didn't see anybody running, but they were definitely going very fast to the Lorcana booth, directly beelining it there to grab that exclusive, right? To grab that early thing, to make sure they get theirs and theirs alone, and everybody else can deal kind of thing. It's that kind of craze. Gen Con let the disabled, people in wheelchairs and stuff like that, literally seconds. So they get into the thing. And so normally they're allowed to get in a little bit earlier because, again, they're moving slower. They need a little bit more room, right? So they're allowed to enter earlier. And they look like, none of them that I could see at least. I actually showed a video. Somebody did a cam footage of it, and it was crazy, right? They were all just kind of coming in like normal, like what you would normally see at Gen Con. And again, I've been there, and that's kind of the normal thing. And then the floodgates open. Everybody else comes from multiple gates, and they just book it and literally start to almost trample the disabled people. Literally, there's a guy in a wheelchair, and he's like pushed off course, and he has to come back, and he's like cursing at these people for like just essentially pushing him aside because they're busy trying to get a trading card. Ridiculous. It is a fundamental failing of both us as a community in this industry, the organizations that host events, and the companies being responsible to both the organization and their customers. It was really, really bad, and it was kind of a, yep, that's an issue, as far as I'm concerned, on multiple fronts. Okay, moving on from that, we have this one also at Gen Con, but this one was actually a Magic the Gathering felony theft that happened. This was pretty crazy. So essentially, two guys that were essentially posing as game devs, though not really. This looked like it was a crime of opportunity, but then also not. It's kind of weird because they also changed their names and did some other funny stuff, right? They go in there, and if you didn't know, typically press and developers that need to set up and stuff like that obviously get in early, right, to set up their booths and do stuff like that, set up stock. And what these two guys did is they saw a pallet full of hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of Magic the Gathering cards, and they just noped on out of there, on camera, of course, because they're idiots, and stole hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of Magic the Gathering cards, and then fled back to New York. Now, of course, again, this is in Indianapolis at Gen Con. There's footage everywhere in all the hotel lobbies and everything. You can see the guys. You can follow them. In fact, they even have it where they can see their rental driving away with all of the cards in the back because it's so much product that it's just stuffed in the back there. Just crazy what went on here. And it kind of goes to show the lack of the organizational part of the industry. And it's something that, part of it is, board games, I think, are a little bit more of a friendlier industry than a lot. And so there's a lot more trust. There's a lot more good faith. There's a lot more hospitality and convenience attempts in a lot of this. But even going into Essen, the biggest one in the world, right? There were times where we were just able to jump into the press line and pretty much go through. Now, they did a lot better job than Gen Con when it came to scanning stuff and all that. So Gen Con, I think, needs to grow a little bit in this case. But Gen Con is the biggest in North America. I think it's the second biggest board game convention in the world after Essen Spiel. And either way, it just goes to show that the industry's growing. the issues within the industry are growing, and the organization around it, the support system around it for us as a community to be able to celebrate it needs to kind of grow a little bit as well. The fact that these two guys are just able to get in there, take a pallet, walk out, and it's just like putting on a safety vest and holding a clipboard and a hard hat and walking into anywhere you want kind of joke, right? Like that's pretty much what they did. And it's just crazy. So that one was pretty bad. And again, just kind of shows the issues of, keeping things secure and whatnot. And on top of that, just the fact that, again, hundreds of thousands of dollars were stolen was pretty darn crazy. They actually then tried to like pawn it off on somebody for like on the cheap, and like it was bad. It was weird. Anyway, so that was a good one. This one hurts a lot. This one hurts a lot for a very specific reason. It's not so much that it was attempted, because I think scams on crowdfunded board games happen all the time. I don't think they're nearly as malicious as this one. I don't think they're always nearly as common as other industries that are doing crowdfunding. You want to see some big scams, go to the video game and electronic/invention section of Kickstarter, and 80% of what you see is like never going to actually be made, and they're just going to take the money and not deliver. Like, it's bad. Board games in general for crowdfunding are so much better than every other industry. It's like laughable. And again, it goes to show that I think deep down the good-natured will of this industry. People are actually trying to just enjoy what we have here. And I think that's awesome. That's great. Then comes Toyzo. Toyzo is a made-up company that randomly sprouted out to scam people out of money on their fake board game table that they have. And I have no issue talking that strongly about it because I've done a lot of research on it, and I think it was pretty obvious what happened. Regardless, they still walked away with almost $500,000, and with the pledge manager that they barely realized they even needed, they're going to end up with even more than that. So easily $500,000 was stolen from people to make something that isn't even real. It was a fake company using, free vector art online, and it didn't have a website, and they kept saying they've been around for years and they have all this stuff, but they were a brand new company, and you never knew anybody's last name or anything like that. You couldn't track down anybody, so people were no-shows. They faked events to show off a prototype table that they had, and they didn't even they changed what they were delivering. They said they could deliver to Walmart. It was crazy. It was an insane and very, very obviously the best you could say is that they have no idea what they're doing, and are just saying, "Oh, we'll figure it out later." So it's a very incredibly unsafe back, and it was just bad. It was so bad, and Kickstarter was told this many times, and Kickstarter investigated and said, no, we're cool with this. And the reason is because Kickstarter got 10% of $500,000 off of them and had to do nothing for it, right? And so like they want things to fund, even if they're scams, because Kickstarter still gets their cut out of it. The scammers get their money, the Kickstarter gets their money, and backers are left with nothing except a distrust for crowdfunded board games. That's exactly what this kind of stuff does. Sadly, the people that did put money into this, hundreds of dollars into this, that won't get anything, and if they do somehow by a miracle get it, it will not be anything like what they were expecting, both in quality and in just functionality, right? And so it's not going to be good either way. And those people, most of them are not going to come back to crowdfunding. We have now lost them in the industry, and it's a loss for the industry that Kickstarter cares so little about it. In fact, it was this incident that made me 100% fully say that every single crowdfunding board game should be on GameFound or BackerKit, anything but Kickstarter. They are doing terrible disservices to this industry. They're hurting this industry. They're hurting backer trust, and we need to move to things better than it. They cannot be trusted to do what's right for us. And it's shown repeatedly. So this is bad on Toyzo, right? For, this random Chinese company that, makes up a whole bunch of lies, makes up a website, steals some art, and, puts a product on there and makes a whole bunch of lies about the company, about the product, and then takes some money and runs with it. that obviously aren't putting any effort into it, that aren't doing any of the goodwill work, aren't putting an effort into communicating and talking with the people and responding to things, and it's just bad. It's just bad. It's obviously a cash grab, and they got away with it. But what hurts even more is that Kickstarter was fine with it because they got that scam money as well. They got that blood money as well, and it's so sad to see. This was a huge blow, and I was honestly tempted to put this higher. In fact, it probably should go higher as I talk through a little bit more, mainly because I was thinking just the Toyzo aspect, but the hurt that this did on Kickstarter's front for me personally, and how I'm covering board games now and telling people, go to GameFound, please, for the love of God, don't use Kickstarter. You're hurting the industry by continuing to support that terrible company. It sucks. It sucks a whole lot. This was a bad one. The only good that could happen from this is, of course, more companies do leave Kickstarter, which is a win for everybody. And I hope to see the continued growth of BackerKit, GameFound, and anybody else doing honest effort in this space when it comes to the safety of backers and the holistic health, the overall health of crowdfunding. And that knowing that killing this project or not allowing this project, even if it sucks that it could have been a real thing, is better for the industry than the risk factor it introduces, right? And I think that's just huge. At this point, that's what we need. Okay, so this was a big one. Who's the bad guy? Quackalope into the unknown. Let me explain this a little bit. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on who did what wrong. I think mistakes happened on both sides. I think one apologized and one didn't, though. So I guess there's that, though how much you put value into that, I guess. Or the fact that I don't think two wrongs necessarily always weigh the same either, right? So I think one made a more damaging thing than the other. Hopefully that makes sense. But regardless, so what happened? Quackalope, Jesse, was trying to cover Into the Unknown's Aeon Trespass Odyssey. Got a patron to kind of show them the game a little bit because Jesse doesn't read the rule books for the game, so he needs somebody to teach him. And Aeon Trespass Odyssey is a huge game. It's a huge game when it comes to that. And depending on how much experience you have, depending on a whole lot of things, teaching that is not necessarily an easy thing to do. So while I know a lot of people, like me, myself included, didn't really have an issue when it came to playing it. For us, it just kind of worked fine. That's not the case for everybody. And so for them, they had a lot of issues. They filmed some videos. It wasn't very good when it comes to like following the rules and stuff like that. And essentially, they go to Into the Unknown and say, hey, we need you guys to teach us how to play this game. If we can get into a partnership where you give us $7,500 and we'll scrap these videos and refilm new ones to make sure that we get it right. But that's obviously a lot of work. I got to pay my employees to play these games, stuff like that. So we need that funding to be able to do it. Otherwise, we'll just go with what we have and call it a loss. That was kind of the whole situation. And that's me trying to balance it as well as possible for both sides. There's a few other details. The only other really big noteworthy one is that Quackalope at the time did make, I think, the mistake of having a series of essentially just giving viewers what they want to hear as opposed to more accurate reflections of quality when it comes to what a product is. And so he did a kind of a, if you hate this game, you're going to love this. And if you love this game, you're going to love this. So he, in one video, says, the Aeon Trespass Odyssey is like the best boss battler I've ever played, pretty much, and one that says this is the worst board game I've ever played. And obviously, it can't be both. He's upping it for both audiences on purpose, right? Which leads to a little bit of trustworthy issues and stuff like that on what's content versus what's real opinion and all that. So it was a whole host of things. It was a mess. It was a mess. To top it off, Into the Unknown decides to just like shotgun the emails on the internet and like show everybody everything and like just kind of really like badmouth Quackalope. And then going forward, Into the Unknown would struggle with a lot of critique. NPI also reviewed it. I don't know why he would ever review a game that obviously he wouldn't like, but he did, and he didn't like it. Surprise, surprise. And so like, but they really pushed back on that. So they have an issue with responding to critics in a non-professional way, I guess I would say, right? And so, like, there was just this huge issue when it came to this. What this highlighted, though, and what the issue that came from this was first of all, the damage that it did to Quackalope's channel, as opposed to the Unknown. Quackalope definitely got really hurt from this. Yeah, he had to lay off the people that he was paying to help with the channel. He had to go back to work and do YouTube part-time. His wife had to go back to work. and help out with the channel part-time. And so like there was a huge life change for them, and they had just gotten married, and it was just a mess. It was a mess. At the same time, it highlighted an issue with reviewers getting paid money from game developers, right? It's because essentially what a lot of people tried to claim is that he was blackmailing them, saying, I will release this super negative video unless you give me $7,500. Of course, he's saying that wasn't his intention, but either way, the ask was for money to exchange hands, and then when money did not exchange hands, a negative video was released, right? Like, if you distill it down, that's what happened, whether it was intentional, malicious, or not. You guys can decide on that, but it really kind of showed a few things. It showed that, one, I'm an idiot, because apparently I haven't been asking for this money, and certainly not nearly enough. My fundraiser, by the way, is set at $8,000, and it's getting halfway there. Thank you so much for donating, by the way, if you can. But the point is that it takes a whole lot of effort just to fundraise the amount that one video series is sent to people who actually accept money. And that's the difference between full-time, I have people on my payroll to be able to produce board game content, and me recording at 2 a.m., right? Like, that's the difference, right? Is one can support a life and one cannot, right? The money just isn't there. So there's more money exchanging hands than I think people realize. So seeing the $7,500, I think woke up a lot of people. I think a lot of people were thinking it was like $500, not, close to $8,000 to just for one sponsored deal. And then you have, dozens of sponsored deals throughout each year, and you're making a fairly healthy revenue stream. Now, of course, there are expenses to that too, like paying employees and doing stuff like that. It's not all profit, but suffice it to say, there was more money exchanging hands because Into the Unknown didn't say no right away. So like they were potentially willing to hand this over, and I'm sure other companies Jesse's worked with have been fine paying whatever prices he lists. I don't know what his normal pricing is. Board game creators don't really talk about that among each other, and because I don't do that, I guess mine's zero. But again, I'm kind of stupid for doing that because obviously I'm putting a lot of money on the table and just kind of leaving it there. So it kind of makes me look kind of silly because I'm like, geez, I could have been making that much. And here I would, even if I asked for something, I feel bad asking for like 400. That seems like, shoot, I don't know. How much am I worth? How much is Quack worth? How much is all the YouTubers that you watch? Like, how much are we worth? What are we providing for you guys? It raised so many questions, so many awareness. I think overall, it's a positive. I think it was a Band-Aid that needed to be ripped off. It was something I think we were leading to. There was a lot of dissatisfaction, distrust in our coverage of these board game devs and the board game industry. And so there's that. What it really told me more, though, was that there is a lack of a legitimate media coverage. And again, the problem with that is the funding, and how does that fund, right? So you get this issue where Jesse's just a guy, right? That like found himself making board game content because of COVID, right? I'm just a guy that found myself doing YouTube board game content because I obsess over my obsessions. And so I can't just get into board gaming casually. I have to do a whole YouTube video on it. But that's besides the point. I have problems. But do you get what I'm saying? Like there's no actual, like there's no CNN of board games, right? Or Fox News of board games, or whatever crappy media company you want to do. And obviously media has other issues, especially when it comes to sponsored content and preferences and stuff like that, when it comes to like journalistic integrity and all that. So I'm not trying to open that can of worms. I'm just saying that there isn't an actual company that is like the de facto company to like talk to, or even multiple that are competing against each other. It's just not a thing. All of this is small time. All of this is just creators that are passionate about board games, that are trying to make it a living. And so they're like, trying to find various ways to fund that passion and fund that coverage and that effort that they're doing. And it's hard. It's hard. You got to sell yourself either to funders, or like fundraising donors, or to companies like Into the Unknown or whoever. Either way, you got to, kind of hustle to do that. And it shows that this industry has a lot to grow to kind of get there. I think there's a few websites that are kind of working on it. And obviously writing an article tends to be a little bit more than like the whole video coverage. But a lot of people, they take in their content like this. So yeah, this was a big one. This was a big one. But I think overall we can learn from it. It just sucks that it was such a painful lesson, especially to the Quackalope channel. Like that's just rough, right? I mean, to happen to anybody. I mean, geez, it was rough. Okay, so this is big. If you didn't know, Embracer is hurting. Embracer is a company that owns companies, one of those kind of things. Big business suits, right? Multi-huge millionaires buying other companies left and right, doing stuff like that. They own Asmodee. So we always talk about like Asmodee owning a huge part of the market share of board games. And like, yeah, that's a thing for sure. Asmodee though is owned by Embracer. Like there's always a bigger fish, right? It's that kind of like, oh, the big fish is actually there's a bigger fish over there, right? That's pulling the strings. It probably all goes back to BlackRock at some point, but Embracer has been doing very bad financially lately and posted a $2 billion loss. That's a lot of zeros. In case you were wondering how many zeros that is, that's 9 zeros. That's a lot. So the question posed there is what will happen to Asmodee? Now, I think for a lot of the things, they're not going to be obvious. There's going to be things that were canceled that we never saw and we're never even aware of, right? Obviously, there were layoffs. I don't know how much it specifically hit Asmodee, but Embracer and all of its companies were kind of really looking at that, right? Because it's the number one thing to do when the, business suit yacht owning multimillionaires lose some of their wealth is a layoff like their workers, right? Like that's always go to. Definitely get that guy who's just doing what you told him to do out of the way. It's not your fault you lost all that money. It's his fault, I guess. So he should be punished for it. Anyway, not going to get into my opinions on that. But obviously there was cuts both in content and in people, I'm sure, and headcount there. But additionally, I don't know what this will do when it comes to the monetization of their games. How do they release it? Because there are some great ways to monetize your games, right? You got subscription through app stuff that I'm sure is going to happen at some point. I remember the very first game I bought was Descent 2nd Edition. And you got a bajillion little spider minis. You got minis for everything, but the cool named lieutenants, story important lieutenants were these little tokens. Because those were sold separately, batteries not included, right? And you couldn't just buy the mini. It had to be with this card pack for this like alternate game mode that nobody played and never heard of anybody ever even dealing with that mode. But it meant that they could charge $15 for a single mini that's like this big. But you want them because he's important to the story. You interact with them a lot. And it sucks to have all these minis attacking a little token, right? And they did it on purpose. It's just there to generate more revenue, to make you spend more. Whether it's not giving you enough dice, whether it's purposely misleading on what Star Wars character they put in the box versus what mini you get inside the box. Whether it's all these other kind of things. There are various ways that you can do that. Maybe making everything a booster pack in cards, right? Who knows? So we'll see what the long-term reaction to that is as Embracer tries to start making more money, because at the end of the day, that's their only purpose, is to see how much money they can make from Asmodee. And in turn, it's Asmodee trying to make as much money as possible without cannibalizing its entire market share to a point that's unacceptable. I'm sure they will. Just how much they're going to eat away at their current user base, besides just trying to grow user base. We'll see. We'll see, but it's going to be big. It's going to be big. All right. That was a weird all right. So we are in the top 3 now. Number 3 I have as the Broken Anvil scam. And I think one of the reasons this was so big is, first of all, they were really big for a long time. And so a lot of people knew about them or had been previous customers with them when they did the miniature STL stuff on Patreon. Now, famously, they moved, and I covered this, I remember, when they first made this announcement that they were moving out of STLs because people were stealing their STLs, which happens all the time. Anytime you release an STL, somebody's going to try and sell it on Etsy or whatever the heck they do. But it's about just as much of an issue as recasts that you'll find. Like you could get every Kingdom Death Monster mini you wanted on the cheap from like Alibaba or like Temu or whatever those like Chinese websites are that'll sell stuff. They'll take the physical mini that you didn't put an STL for, make a cast of it, and then make duplicates of it, right, and sell it that way on the cheap. The detail's not as good, it's lower quality, but they sell it for cheap, and you could totally do that. That's always been a thing, so that was dumb anyway. But either way, they said we're going physical only, and we're doing all this stuff. We're making a board game, we're making minis, we're making paints, we're doing all that. That's fine, whatever, right? But it turns out they were like never making any money on this, and in fact, they were releasing stuff like the Forge campaign that came out later. An alleged former employee said this about the CEO, and it seems to all line up, honestly. But that was just there to try and pay for the loss that they already were. They were hoping it would explode in popularity, and then when it didn't, they kept like releasing other campaigns to do that. And it goes to show that not only was this essentially keep getting money without delivering scheme, right? And I'm not saying it was maliciously done even. It's not like how can I make a whole bunch of money? Because that's not what people go into the board game industry for at all. But it was definitely a case where the backer trust was betrayed here, because they were never mentioning these issues, right? We didn't know about it until it was an issue. And then you find out all these past things were an issue. Suddenly the paints, that's an issue. Suddenly the forge, that's an issue. Suddenly Rivetstone, that's an issue. Whereas when you go to the campaign page, risk and challenges, nah, we're fine, right? So it's that kind of like lying to the customer, because obviously nobody's going to give you money if you're saying, oh yeah, we actually need it because we're not going to be able to deliver our past stuff. And so you're going to save this company. Like, good luck getting people to buy your product, right? So you lie about it and you say everything's fine and there's no risk, even though there technically is. And so this was a big issue here that Broken Anvil had. It was the biggest one, I think, here, because not only did it affect multiple campaigns again, but a lot of people were aware of it from outside the board game industry. And seeing this negativity around the board game industry, especially crowdfunding, means that a very big potential market, right? Anybody doing 3D printed, little figurines for their D&D stuff is pretty industry adjacent, and therefore prime market growth material, right? And so I'm sure it turned off a lot of people from ever even trying it, because they see companies doing scams like this. So Broken Anvil, again, hurt this industry. And the only thing we can learn from it is to try and be better ourselves at looking at the past of companies, because they will not tell you the truth when it comes to any kind of issue. They will simply try and make it seem like a great deal, because at the end of the day, that campaign page is an advertisement. So even though there's a risk and challenges, they're using that as an advertisement too. They're going to talk about their good things, not their bad things, right? They will always show themselves in the best light possible, even if it's not so truthful. But as big as they were, they ain't Mythic Games. When it comes to ruining the industry, Mythic Games is on a whole nother level when it comes to the damage that they have done. I don't know how many times, and feel free to comment on this, I don't know how many times you guys have told me I have stopped backing crowdfunded board games because of Mythic Games, because of stuff like this. They are single-handedly killing it for everybody else. If you are another developer, you should not be happy with Mythic Games, because they are hurting your sales. They are hurting everybody's sales. They are hurting your potential to create what you love. They are hurting your potential to deliver great product to people who enjoy the product. You can't blame the people. I mean, if you lose so much money, you lose so much money, right? It's really on Mythic Games around this. It sucks. It really does suck. There was another thumbnail I almost posted. It was the Mythic Games that said betrayal. And the reason that's the case is, so if you didn't know, Mythic Games has been asking for additional money to develop, print, and deliver the game, as well as run the company, because they are out of money. And they did this whole thing where, with Anastasia and everything else, they kept launching products assuming that it would pay for the past stuff. And when they didn't, when suddenly Anastasia failed, suddenly it all came crumbling down. It turns out we don't have the money to deliver any of this stuff. We never did. We were just hoping money would keep coming in, and through that we would do it. And if there's ever a dip, suddenly we can't anymore. But it got worse. It got so much worse. So not only were they asking for more contributions, but the contributions were incredibly high. And then not only that, but they kept lying and not being able to follow their word when it came to what they were doing. For instance, they said, Darkest Dungeon, if you pay now, you're paying for both ways, Wave 1 and Wave 2, right? We promise that's the case. They deliver Wave 1. It's a great game, by the way. And then Wave 2 comes. And guess what? They charged again. Lies! Just kidding. You still have to pay, actually, because, again, they don't have any money. If you don't pay, the company just goes under. So it's either pay or nobody gets their game ever, because we're done. And so even though they had tried to do that, it still wasn't the case. They still weren't able to deliver it. And it's so bad. It's so bad. What they've done to this industry is terrible. And it's pretty much a worst case scenario through and through for everybody involved. It just really sucks. There's not really much more to be said about that. So we're on to the final one here. I just want to say thank you, obviously, if you made it this far in the video. I've had a blast talking about all this because, again, I think being aware of these issues, I know they're negative, but they can make you a better backer. They can make you a better developer. They can keep in mind what's important, right? And how to enjoy this hobby properly. And so I think it's overall a positive thing. For instance, Wizards of the Coast / Hasbro / whatever, right? The biggest name in the market when it comes to these board games, They own D&D, and they're idiots. This thumbnail was fun to say the least. Just because you don't often get a situation where you can just call a company out for a few reasons. One of them is because you don't often get companies that are big enough to not be personable. So a lot of times, even if a company is making millions on Kickstarter, you know the name of the person writing the update. You see the actual CEO sitting down and playing the board games, right? It's still relatable. You still personify the company because there are people involved. And I'm a big proponent of that, constantly talking about the people, not just the company. But Wizards of the Coast, you get to kind of this point where you lose that. And Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro and all that are obviously well past that point where it's just this like corporate entity run by businessmen trying to monetize and make their millions off of board games in the tabletop world, right? Like that's what their goal is. They're not like they're not your gamers and your tabletop fans or anything like that. They're just businessmen making money and doing business, and just happens to be in board games, right? So like that's where they're at. So that kind of helps a little bit, but also because they were so clearly like misguided that it was pretty obvious what was going on. And the idiots comment specifically is because I've never seen a company shoot themselves in their own foot so much. Like that is impressive to kill your own market. I'm talking about cannibalizing your market, and this is an example of that. So what do I mean by that? Companies, especially publicly traded companies, have to always make more money. No matter how good of a year you do, next year better be better. If you increase by 3,000%, the next year you better increase by 4,000%. And the time after that, it is never ending, it is insatiable, and it will always lead to eventual destruction. You cannot possibly grow to infinity. At some point, you have all your market share. So there are ways around that, right? And you see this was, for instance, Amazon Prime. I'm sure you just got this email saying that they're putting ads in your paid for Amazon Prime videos because they are starting to cannibalize their market. YouTube, right, has famously now started doing that where they're fighting against ad blockers and doing that kind of stuff because they are trying to cannibalize their market, right? I was grandfathered into the YouTube music thing from really early on. I was paying $7.99. Now it's $14.99. The grandfather thing is no more because they're cannibalizing their market. Essentially, once you cannot grow so easily any farther, or the growth is so incredibly expensive, it doesn't make sense to grow anymore, right? In other words, yeah, we could gain that market, but it costs us billions or whatever, right? Like at that point, then you still have to make more money, but you can't just get more people giving you money. So you have to make the people giving you money give more, right? It's just how Kickstarters work or crowdfunded board games work, where you have essentially a set amount of backers that if you do everything right, are there pretty much day two, right? By day two, you've pretty much locked in your backer count for the most part. You'll get a few ups and downs, but if you played your cards right, you had a good offering at a good price, and you did the right advertising, you should have the majority of your market share there. And then to increase the funds, you have to slowly trickle feed add-ons so that the people there are paying more. It's the same thing here. Wizards of the Coast did the same thing with Dungeons and Dragons, where Dungeons and Dragons has grown and grown and grown, which is good, right? They just had the movie out and it's become popular, and all these other companies are, like spawning kind of adjacent to it, around it to enhance it and stuff like that. It's because it has an open license, which is super cool and allows other companies to enhance the product, right? It's a lot like a lot of other IPs. I don't want to go, list them all, but either way, like there's supplemental stuff around it, right? That helps support it and kind of celebrate it. But that means there's other companies making product off your thing, making money off your thing, right? And so they decided that after all these years, that there was an opportunity to get more money, to make sure that these companies that are making money off of D&D, your hard-earned IP, by changing that license, retroactively even. Which is crazy. So companies were suddenly like, we're going to have to go out of business. We cannot make these source books anymore. We cannot do this anymore, right? It was going to be bad. And not only that, but like we can't even just like keep the stuff we had because it's going to be like retroactively changed even. It was such a bad move. It was so stupid of them to do this. But it was just a businessman detached from the gaming world. He don't play no games. He ain't role playing as like a druid somewhere. Right? Like he ain't doing that. He's busy counting his money on his yacht somewhere or something, right? So like, he's like, yeah, let's do that, right? It's kind of like the Christmas Vacation, the guy who's like, bonuses, I got rid of bonuses, So anyway, That's the idea, is how can we get more money from who we already have? And the case on that is to monetize every other thing adjacent to it so that more people are having to pay for you to use it. And of course it backfired. Now they've backpedaled since then, but the damage was already done and so many people left the system for alternatives. In fact, one of the biggest crowdfunding things on BackerKit recently was a new RPG system not based on 5th edition because people are moving away from Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons is still really big, granted, and they always will be. There's nothing wrong with that. And a lot of people like the system, but they are idiots for shooting themselves in the foot so much. And what trying to gain money lost them so much, and will continue for years to come. That it's a fundamental shaker in the tabletop world. I think it's great because, I mean, a lot of people looked past D&D to all the other cool systems that are out there. I think that's awesome. And I think it's good for the industry to be run by themselves more than Wizards of the Coast when it comes to them just owning the vast majority of things. But yeah, idiots. All right, guys. So that was 2023 in a nutshell, at least when it came to all the issues. There were obviously cool games in there and awesome companies and great moments and all that kind of stuff. I don't want you to think this is all negative, but there are definitely issues, and 2023 was full of them. And if we are going to make 2024 better, then we as backers, we as consumers, and we as creators, and we as makers need to do better. Let's learn from these mistakes and do better. All right, guys, that's it. That's all I have for today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you again really soon before 2024, but then in 2024 and beyond. Thank you so much for your wonderful support. Thank you for a wonderful year. Thank you for being an awesome community. Take care, guys. Bye.